Sunday mornings usually feel warm to me, like slipping into a soft sweater in a quiet kitchen. The toaster hums, the coffee smells rich, and I move around the table with a rhythm built over years of routine. I set Ethan's mug in front of him, waiting for that crooked smile he always gives when he says I make it better than any barista. But today he just stares into the cup, stirring slowly, as if the coffee might bite him back. You know that moment when the room hasn't changed, but something inside it has? That's exactly what hits my chest as I watch him from across the table. I think I need therapy, Nat, he finally says, eyes fixed on the swirling coffee like it holds his confession. His words don't burst out. They fall gently between us, heavy and deliberate. My first instinct isn't fear, it's tenderness. That pull to be steady, to be supportive, to help him carry whatever he's holding. I've been feeling off. Angry, maybe. I don't want to take it out on us, he adds, rubbing his thumb along the mug's rim. I reach for his hand, feeling how warm and tense it is, and offer him a smile meant to lend him strength. I think that's brave, I tell him. You've been through a lot. Do you know who you'll see? He hesitates. Just a second, but I notice it because wives always notice the little things. Yeah, he says, clearing his throat. I found someone recommended online, Dr. Elise Warren. First session's tomorrow. I nod, still holding his hand, feeling proud because this looks like effort, like growth, like love choosing to try. Good, I say, letting the warmth in my voice wrap around him. I'm proud of you, Ethan. But when I stand to clear the plates, the name that left his mouth lingers in mine, echoing faintly like a half-remembered tune. Elise Warren. Familiar somehow, tugging at a thread in my memory I can't quite pull free yet. After breakfast, Ethan headed to the living room, pretending to read while his mind wandered somewhere I couldn't follow. I stayed in the kitchen a little longer than usual, letting the silence settle, letting that unfamiliar name drift around in my head. There was something about it, Elise Warren, like a faint bell ringing in a far corner of my memory. I grabbed my phone, telling myself it was harmless curiosity, the kind every spouse has when something doesn't quite click. But my thumb hesitated above the search bar, as if typing her name would make something real that I hadn't even defined yet. Still, curiosity won, and I typed it slowly, letter by letter. The search results popped up with her photo, polished, professional, smiling with that practiced therapist warmth. But even through the screen, something tugged at me, like seeing a stranger whose face feels too familiar to ignore. Her eyes, maybe, or the curve of her smile. Some tiny detail pulled at an old thread I didn't realize still existed. I read her credentials, her degrees, her office address, trying to convince myself that this was just a woman doing her job. I told myself I was being silly, that coincidences happen every day, and names repeat in big cities. But deep down, a small, uneasy whisper began to form, asking questions I wasn't ready to hear. I put my phone face down on the counter, breathing out slowly, trying to release the knot in my stomach. When I turned back toward the living room, Ethan looked up and smiled at me. The same gentle smile he'd always had. And for a moment, I believed everything was normal again, like breakfast had been just a bump in the road. But even as I sat beside him, pretending to read my own book, I could feel the question hovering between us. Who was this woman he was trusting with his mind? And why did her name feel like the start of a story I didn't want to remember? I didn't know it yet, but this quiet Sunday morning was the last peaceful one I'd have for a long time. That afternoon, Ethan grew more talkative, almost lighter, as if admitting he needed help had opened a window inside him. He told me he wanted to reset, to understand himself better, to be the man he used to be before stress and life wore him down. I listened carefully, nodding, letting him feel heard, because that's what partners do when the person they love is trying. But even as I smiled, a small flicker of doubt lingered, faint but persistent, like a draft sneaking through a closed window. It wasn't suspicion, not yet. It was more like a quiet intuition, tapping gently, asking me not to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing, that therapy would help him, help us, help everything settle back into place. That night, he packed his work bag for the morning session, folding his clothes neatly the way he only did when he wanted to impress someone. I watched him from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, pretending to check my phone so he wouldn't see the shift in my eyes. He picked a nicer shirt than usual, spritzed a bit more cologne, even checked his hair twice in the mirror. When he finally noticed me watching, he smiled with that boyish charm that used to melt me instantly. "Nervous," he said, brushing imaginary lint off his sleeve. "First sessions always feel weird, right?" I stepped forward, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "You'll be fine. Just be honest." Later, as he slept beside me, steady and calm, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't, replaying breakfast, the hesitation in his voice, the familiar name. It felt like standing at the edge of a path I didn't want to walk, knowing the first step was coming whether I chose it or not. I kept telling myself this was normal, that people change, seek help, grow. But some part of me, soft and instinctive, already sensed that this wasn't the beginning of healing. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something I couldn't name yet, but would soon face head-on. 2 weeks later, the shift in Ethan was impossible to ignore. He moved through the house with a lighter step, humming sometimes, smiling to himself like he carried a private victory. He talked less about work, less about us, and more about how clarity takes time, the phrase he repeated after each Thursday session. Every week he left earlier, dressed a little sharper, choosing shirts he hadn't worn in years unless we had dinner reservations. I told myself he was trying, that therapy was waking something good inside him. But something in that glow felt borrowed, like he was getting sunshine from somewhere else and bringing home only the leftover warmth. One Thursday afternoon, he rushed out the door with a brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen since our early dating years. He sprayed cologne twice, checked his reflection, and said, "I don't want to be late. Breakthrough day, maybe." I smiled and nodded, but inside, something twisted. Small, sharp, undeniable. It wasn't jealousy. It was the ache of watching someone bloom, but realizing the petals weren't turning toward you anymore. When the door closed behind him, the silence in the house felt almost instructional, like it was asking me to pay attention. So I did. I started noticing the little things he didn't think I'd see. That evening, after he came home claiming the session left him exhausted, he tossed his shirt on the bed before showering. I picked it up, smoothing the fabric the way I always do, comforting myself through routine. But when I slipped it into the laundry basket, my fingers brushed something in the pocket. A small folded business card, warm from his body heat, with her name printed in clean, elegant letters. And then I saw the handwriting on the back, soft, slanted, too intimate to mistake for clinical professionalism. "Thank you for opening up today, E. You're doing great." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor shifted under me. I held the card between my fingers, staring at the message as if each letter were a tiny blade dragging across my skin. No therapist signs their notes with something that gentle, something that personal, something that sounds like a secret whispered behind a closed door. I tried to breathe slowly, to keep myself from jumping to conclusions, reminding myself that fear can twist anything into a threat. But the handwriting wasn't professional encouragement. It was familiarity dressed up as therapy. And the way she wrote his initial, just E, that was the part that cut the deepest. I sat on the edge of the bed, card still in hand, my pulse thudding like it wanted to warn me of something bigger. The room felt too quiet, too still, as if everything inside it was holding its breath with me. I picked up my phone, opened Facebook, and typed her name again, this time with a steadier hand, but a heavier heart. There she was, the same photo as before, polished, perfect, disarming in that way only therapists and predators seem to master. But then I clicked on older pictures, older posts. And one detail hit me like a punch I never saw coming. Elise Warren had once been Elise Monroe, Ethan's ex-girlfriend from college, the one he dated right before me. For a moment, I just froze, letting the truth settle over me like cold water. He didn't find someone recommended online. He went back to someone who already knew him, someone who once broke his heart, and apparently still had access to whatever was left of it. My hands started shaking, anger mixing with disbelief, creating that terrible cocktail of emotions that makes you feel too hot and too cold at the same time. I stood up, paced the room, tried to gather my thoughts before the shower turned off, and Ethan walked back into the story. Because now I had two truths, the card in my hand and the past on my screen, and together they formed a question I no longer wanted to avoid. Later that night, I tried to sound casual as I leaned on the doorway and asked, "So, how's therapy?" He looked up from the bed, smiling like he carried something warm inside him. "Good," he said. "She's easy to talk to." "She?" I asked, letting the word fall soft but pointed, like a feather with a blade hidden in its tip. "Yeah, Dr. Warren. She's professional, Nat." "Right," I said, nodding. "Of course, professional." He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, which somehow hurt even more. He just kept folding his clothes for the next day, humming lightly, as if we were discussing weather and not the woman who used to own a chapter of his heart. I watched him for a moment, studying the way he avoided eye contact, the way his smile flickered too quickly. People think lies reveal themselves in grand gestures, but it's always the tiny pauses, the careful exhalations, the little rehearsed shrugs that tell the real story. And standing there, with the business card burning a hole in my pocket, I realized he was already writing a new story without me. A story I hadn't agreed to be a character in. When he climbed into bed, I lay beside him with my back turned, pretending to scroll through my phone. But I wasn't reading anything. I was replaying every word he'd said over the past 2 weeks. The new cologne, the longer sessions, the sudden clarity, the guarded smiles, the avoidance of details. Each moment clicked into place like puzzle pieces I had been too trusting to arrange sooner. At one point, he reached out, resting a hand on my waist out of habit, but even his touch felt borrowed. "Long day," he mumbled. "Therapy takes a lot out of you." I swallowed the laugh that almost escaped, the bitter one, the kind that comes when pain meets clarity. "Honesty," I whispered under my breath, barely loud enough for the room to catch it. "That's new." He paused. "What?" "Nothing," I answered, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Just tired." But inside, something had shifted, a quiet, razor-sharp awareness settling in. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, because now I needed truth, not stories. And the only way to get it was to watch the lie unfold a little longer. If he thought therapy would help him work on himself, he had no idea what I was capable of once I started working on the truth. By the next Thursday, I'd learned how to move around him quietly, like someone studying a wild animal she doesn't want to spook. He left the house humming again, wearing a shirt he used to save for anniversaries, spraying that same cologne twice, the scent trailing behind him like a confession. I watched from the window as he backed out of the driveway, confident, comfortable, almost excited. That excitement was what finally snapped something inside me. Therapy shouldn't make you look like you're going on a date. So instead of cleaning the kitchen or pretending to work, I grabbed my keys and followed 10 minutes later, keeping enough distance to stay invisible. My heart thudded, not with anger yet, but with the cold clarity of a woman who's finally ready to stop being lied to. He didn't drive toward the office printed on her business card. He drove across town, turning into a quiet neighborhood lined with old trees and small, well-kept homes. I slowed the car, breathing deeply, watching him pull up to a beige townhouse with plants on the balcony, the kind of place where secrets don't echo. He stepped out, checked his hair in the car window, and knocked on the door. And when she opened it, Elise, in soft curls and a fitted sweater, he smiled in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Not therapy, not healing, something else entirely. I parked a block away, far enough to hide but close enough to witness the truth without needing imagination. An hour passed with no movement, just shadows dancing behind closed curtains. Then another hour. Then the door finally opened, and they walked out together, hand in hand, laughing. The kind of laugh lovers use when they're so comfortable in their sin they forget the world exists. And then Ethan leaned down and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that nearly made my knees buckle. For a moment, I couldn't even move. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching the man I'd shared a home, a life, a history with, touch another woman like she was the safest place he'd ever known. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It freezes, locking you inside your own body while the world keeps turning without mercy. My breath felt too loud, my pulse too sharp, like my own heartbeat was betraying me by refusing to calm down. I lifted my phone with trembling hands, zoomed in, and took the picture. The one that turned suspicion into certainty. One click, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage shattered cleanly, like glass breaking in slow motion. I stayed there even after they went back inside, letting the truth settle into every corner of my mind. Memory after memory played like a cruel highlight reel. Our wedding vows, his promises, the quiet mornings we once cherished. Then I saw the contrasts, the new cologne, the longer showers, the exhausted evenings that suddenly made too much sense. They weren't coincidences, they were breadcrumbs I'd ignored because love makes you blind in all the wrong places. And sitting there in that parked car, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not sadness, but resolve. A resolve so cold and clear that it steadied my breathing and sharpened my focus. By the time Ethan walked through our front door that night, I was ready. He dropped his keys on the table, loosened his tie, and said, "Therapy ran late. We talked about boundaries and honesty. It's exhausting." Honesty. The word almost made me laugh, but I swallowed it, letting only a whisper slip out. Honesty. That's new. He paused for half a second, just long enough for guilt to flicker across his face before he forced a smile. "What?" he asked, pretending not to notice the shift in my tone. "Nothing," I said, offering a soft smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just proud of your progress." He kissed my forehead before heading to the shower, the same way he always did, but now the gesture felt like an insult wrapped in routine. I stood in the hallway listening to the water run, imagining Elise's hands in his hair, the softness in his smile that he no longer saved for me. It's strange how betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It arrives in waves, each one carving out a little more of the person you used to be. But instead of falling apart, I felt myself harden, not cold, just steady, like steel being forged in quiet fire. I walked into the bedroom, opened my drawer, and pulled out the printed photo I'd made earlier. One image, one truth, proof that couldn't be explained away with rehearsed excuses. I held it in my hands for a moment, running my thumb across the glossy surface, studying the way they looked at each other. There was history in their posture, something old reignited, something familiar, something dangerous. And it made me realize that this wasn't a moment of weakness for him. It was a choice. A deliberate, repeated choice he made every Thursday while I folded laundry and made dinner for two. The woman in that picture wasn't just his therapist. She was the past he never closed the door on. And now, she was the present he was lying to protect. When he came out of the shower, steam following him into the hallway, I placed the photo back in the drawer before he could see it. I smiled, asked about his session with practiced softness, and let him believe I was still blind. Because confronting a liar too early only teaches them how to lie better. I needed more than emotion. I needed strategy. So that night, as he drifted to sleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling with a calm I didn't recognize. I wasn't planning a confrontation anymore. I was planning justice. By the next week, my shock had cooled into something sharper, a controlled calm that felt almost unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's strength. I waited until Ethan left for work, then sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the photo beside me, its edges already worn from the number of times I'd held it. I typed, "Elise Warren Therapy Office," into the search bar and dialed the number that appeared, steadying my voice before the receptionist picked up. "Hi," I said warmly. "I'd like to book a private session, something personal." I used my maiden name, softened my tone, made myself sound like a woman seeking comfort instead of truth. She offered me an appointment for that afternoon, and I accepted without a second thought. Driving to her office, I felt strangely weightless, like I was outside my own body watching the plan unfold. The building was quiet, the kind of place made to feel safe. Soft lighting, fake plants, gentle music humming through the hallway. I sat in the waiting room for 5 minutes, listening to the faint ticking of a wall clock, my heartbeat perfectly steady beneath it. Then the door opened and Elise stepped out with a smile, the same rehearsed softness she'd probably used on Ethan hours before. But the moment her eyes landed on me, something flickered behind them, a spark of recognition she wasn't ready to admit. She offered her hand. "Hi, I'm Dr. Warren. Please, come in." I followed her into the office, closing the door behind us with deliberate care, sealing us in together. She didn't recognize me fully yet, but her posture shifted, just slightly. The body always knows danger before the mind catches up. I sat across from her, crossing my legs calmly, watching her prepare her notepad. Then I smiled, not kindly but knowingly, the kind of smile that carries a truth still wrapped in velvet. "I appreciate you seeing me," I said, letting my voice settle into the room. "I've heard quite a lot about you." For a moment, she tried to maintain her clinical composure, offering the kind of measured smile therapists practice in the mirror. But I saw the faint tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the pen, the way her eyes kept searching my face for a clue she already feared. "So," she began, voice carefully neutral, "what brings you in today?" I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms comfortably, as if I were settling in for a story I'd already memorized. "I'm here because someone very close to me has been getting special attention," I said, watching the color drain from her cheeks. "And I thought it was time to meet the woman behind all that healing." She swallowed hard, glancing toward the door for a split second, a tiny, instinctive look that told me she was searching for an escape. "I'm not sure I understand," she whispered, though her voice wavered, giving away the truth her words tried to hide. "Oh, I think you do," I replied softly, leaning forward enough that she could smell Ethan's cologne lingering on my clothes. The silence sat heavy between us, and I could practically feel her mind racing, calculating lies, rearranging excuses, grasping for professionalism she no longer owned. "Mrs. Cole," she finally said, her voice cracking as realization hit her fully, "I didn't realize that Ethan's wife would walk straight into your little web?" I finished for her, smiling with a cold grace. "No, I'm sure you didn't." She set the pen down, hands trembling now, her face stripped of that polished therapist confidence. "This isn't appropriate," she whispered. "I think you should—" I cut her off, slow and steady. "You think what you've been doing is appropriate?" You think crossing ethical lines for sex qualifies as therapy? Her breath hitched, shame, or fear, pooling in her eyes. And pretending to fix my marriage while breaking it, I continued. Tell me, Elise, is that part of the treatment plan? She flinched at her own name, and that's when I knew I had her exactly where I needed her. Her breathing turned shallow, her confidence dissolving like sugar in hot water. I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately, letting suspense coil thick in the room as she watched with wide, frightened eyes. Then I placed the printed photo on her desk, the one of her and Ethan holding hands outside her townhouse, his lips pressed to her forehead. It landed between us like a confession neither of us needed to speak aloud. Her face drained of color, her fingers twitching toward the picture before she pulled her hand back, as if touching it would burn her. You may want to find a therapist yourself, I said, my voice calm as ice. Because this is going to cost you. She blinked hard, trying to form words, but they came out broken. Please, don't do this. There was no anger in her voice now, only fear, raw and unfiltered, the kind that strips a person down to pure truth. I stood slowly, smoothing my blouse, watching her shrink into the chair that once gave her power. Tomorrow morning, I told her, sliding the photo closer. This picture and every message you sent him will go to your licensing board. Her lips parted in a silent plea, but I wasn't finished. I'm also sending it to your husband, I added, feeling nothing but steady resolve as her eyes flooded with panic. And since Ethan used work hours for his little sessions, I continued, his company's HR will get a copy too. Her voice cracked. You don't have to do this. I met her gaze, letting her see the woman she underestimated, steady, wounded, and no longer willing to be quiet. You already did it, I said, reaching for the door. I'm just giving you a mirror. And with that, I walked out, leaving her alone with the ruins she had built with my husband. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks, the kind that settles into your bones, steady and unshakable. I made coffee the same way I always did, listening to the quiet drip, letting the calm build in the spaces where my grief once lived. Then I opened my laptop, uploaded the photo, and drafted 3 emails with hands that no longer trembled. One to the state licensing board, one to Ethan's company's HR department, and one to Elise's husband, a man who deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I didn't add drama or threats, just facts, timestamps, evidence, and the picture that captured everything they tried to hide. When I finally clicked send on all 3, there was no rush of victory, just the slow, steady exhale of a woman reclaiming control. For a moment, I sat back in my chair, feeling the morning sun hit my face, warming the parts of me that had gone cold. It wasn't revenge that filled me. It was relief. The kind that comes from refusing to carry someone else's sins any longer. By the time Ethan got home that night, his entire world had already begun to collapse. He walked in with wide eyes, his phone buzzing nonstop, his face pale in a way I'd never seen before. Natalie, he said, voice shaking, we need to talk. He looked like a man drowning, desperate for a hand to pull him back to shore. But I wasn't his shoreline anymore. I was the storm he never saw coming. And I was ready for every word he was about to say. He tossed his phone onto the counter, running both hands through his hair like he was trying to tear the panic out of his scalp. You did this? He demanded, though his voice cracked halfway through, betraying him before I ever had to. I stayed seated at the table, hands wrapped calmly around my mug, watching him unravel with a steadiness he didn't expect. No, Ethan, I said, lifting my eyes to meet his. You did this. I just hit send. The words settled between us like a quiet explosion. No shouting, no trembling, just truth delivered clean and sharp. He stumbled back a step, as if honesty itself had weight. You ruined everything, he yelled, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal searching for an escape he'd already sealed shut. Everything? I repeated slowly, standing just enough to meet him at eye level. Our marriage? Our trust? You think I ruined that? His face twisted, guilt fighting with anger, shame tangling with defensiveness. I made a mistake, he said, voice dropping into something desperate, something he hoped would soften me. You didn't make a mistake, I replied. You built one, week after week, session after session, lie after lie. Each word stripped the last pieces of denial from his face. He tried again, softer this time, the way he used to speak when he wanted forgiveness handed to him like a gift. Natalie, please, we can fix this. I shook my head slowly, feeling a strange peace settle in my chest. Not coldness, just certainty. You didn't want to fix us. You wanted to relive whatever fantasy she represented, I said. You recycled our marriage with someone else. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not explanation, not apology, not love. There was nothing left for him to say, and nothing left for me to hear. He reached for me then, not gently, not lovingly, but with the panic of someone grabbing for the last branch before the fall. But I stepped back, and that tiny movement spoke louder than anything I could have said. His shoulders dropped, the fight leaving him all at once, replaced by a hollow resignation that finally told the truth. For years, I'd been the anchor in his storms, the safe place he returned to. But somewhere along the way, he'd chosen a different shoreline. And now he was shocked that I was done being the harbor he wrecked himself against. I walked past him, the decision already made in the quietest parts of me. In the bedroom, my suitcase sat open on the bed, half packed, half liberating. I folded my clothes slowly, not rushing, not hiding, letting him stand in the doorway and watch everything he took for granted slip out of his reach. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice barely holding itself together. "Away from the mess you built," I answered, zipping the suitcase with a finality that made his breath hitch. "You went to therapy to fix your guilt," I said softly. "Congratulations. You're cured." Because now, with me leaving, there was nothing left for him to feel guilty about. I picked up the suitcase, feeling lighter than I had in months. He followed me to the door, begging now, grasping at empty promises, swearing he could change. But he already had, just not for me. The house felt strangely peaceful as I opened the door, like it had been waiting for this breath of honesty. I looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. "You made your choice," I whispered. "Now I'm making mine." And I closed the door softly behind me, leaving him alone with the consequences he'd crafted so carefully. Months later, I found myself sitting on a different couch, softer, warmer, untouched by betrayal. The office smelled faintly of lavender and old books, the kind of scent that makes your shoulders drop the moment you breathe it in. Light poured through the tall windows, washing the room in a calm that felt earned, not borrowed. And across from me sat a real therapist, one who didn't hide behind rehearsed smiles or tangled loyalties. Her voice was steady, grounding, the kind that makes you feel like you can finally stop pretending everything is fine. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed healing was possible. She leaned forward slightly, legs crossed, pen resting gently against her notebook. "You've made a lot of progress," she said, with a warm sincerity that didn't feel manufactured. "What do you think helped you the most?" I looked down at my hands, no longer shaking, no longer holding on to anything that wasn't mine to carry. I thought about the nights I cried, the mornings I rebuilt myself, piece by steady piece. And then I smiled, small but genuine, the kind that grows from truth rather than survival. "Finding out that closure isn't about forgiveness," I said. It's about finally seeing someone for who they really are and choosing not to look back. The words tasted honest, solid, like they'd been waiting inside me long before I ever spoke them aloud. The therapist nodded, her eyes soft with understanding, and the room felt brighter for it. Outside the window, sunlight filtered through the leaves, warm, clean, new. A reminder that life doesn't just continue, it begins again. I left the therapist's office that day walking a little slower, letting the air fill my lungs in a way I'd forgotten was possible. There was no weight pressing against my ribs, no tightness in my throat, just a quiet steadiness like my body had finally remembered how to belong to itself. On the sidewalk, people passed by wrapped in their own stories, and for once, I didn't feel small inside mine. I felt present, awake. Every step sounded different on the pavement, lighter, like I was leaving echoes of my old self behind. And maybe I was. Maybe healing meant allowing those echoes to fade. I stopped at a small cafe on the corner, the kind I used to walk by without noticing, always rushing, always distracted. But now I stepped inside, letting the warm smell of roasted coffee and vanilla wrap around me. I ordered a drink I'd never tried before. Something sweet, something new, something that didn't belong to any version of me tied to him. When I sat by the window, sunlight poured over the table, turning my cup into something golden. And I realized how long it had been since I'd done something gentle just for myself. No guilt, no weight, just a small, quiet pleasure. As I sipped the coffee, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, not to check for his messages, but to delete the last ones he'd ever sent. Each swipe felt like closing a door that should have been shut long ago. I didn't reread anything, didn't analyze, didn't ache. I simply released. Outside, leaves fluttered across the sidewalk, carried by a breeze that felt almost symbolic. For the first time, I wasn't chasing closure. I was living it. And as I watched the world move gently around me, I knew something with absolute certainty. I had finally recovered myself. That evening, I walked into my apartment, the one I chose, the one that didn't hold echoes of lies, and felt a peace so solid it almost startled me. No shadows of someone else's secrets. No perfume lingering that wasn't mine, just quiet, warm, honest space. I set my keys on the table, kicked off my shoes, and realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, fully, finally, and without apology. As I curled up on the couch with a blanket, I let my mind wander to all the moments that brought me here. The confusion, the hurt, the truth unraveling thread by painful thread. But then I saw what came after, the strength I rebuilt, the boundaries I found, the voice I stopped silencing. Healing was never about erasing what happened. It was about growing around it, like a tree twisting gracefully around a scar. And I had grown, higher, steadier, rooted in myself again. Later, as the city lights flickered through my window, I whispered the final truth I hadn't been able to say aloud until now. He sought therapy to escape his guilt. I found mine to find peace. And for the first time, that peace didn't feel like something I had to fight for. It felt earned, gentle, whole. Because in the end, I didn't need someone else's bed to feel complete. I just needed myself.